Oh dear, this does not look good.
Welcome back to Canuck Air. What I have here is arguably one of the all-time classics in air rifles. And yes, it's yet another .177 caliber spring piston gun that I can't mount a scope on. How do I need another one of those in my collection? Well, this is a Diana 27. As I said, it's considered a classic, and I sort of understand it when you pick one up. It seems to be the right size and shape for an air rifle. It's not too big, not too small. It clearly, would work well for a youth-oriented shooter. Somebody who doesn't have the upper body strength to cock anything monstrous, or has a shorter arms and doesn't need all the length of pole, makes it difficult to get their eyes down to the sights. So I said this is a Model 27 that Diana made for quite a number of years. There were some pre-war versions, post-war versions. I believe they stopped making them sometime in the 1980s. I'll look that up for you. This one here, though, is sort of a Diana. Marked right on here, it says British made. Diana Model 27, British made. In the post-war period, there were products out there that were labeled foreign made, just to let you know that they didn't come from anywhere, from around here, and possibly from some country we're at war with recently. And there were also things you could find that were labeled empire made, which was in some cases a euphemism for Hong Kong. But British made in this instance means it was made at the Milborough factory in Scotland, because in the post-war period, Diana, the Diana brand, models, tooling, and everything was auctioned off in the post-war period from Meyer and Grammelsbacher, the original producers of Diana guns, and Milborough purchased that and made Diana marked guns in Scotland until the 1980s. This one has on its butt a stamping that suggests it was made in 1952, which is an early production for Milborough products, so within just the first few years. So that's kind of cool. But it isn't a German-made Diana, and as such, I believe it does not have the fancy 3 ball bearing trigger. There are ball bearings in it, but they aren't the type that release the collar that pops open and the balls allow the piston to escape. Considered a very fancy trigger in its time. This one is not that version, but it is a fancy type of trigger. When you cock the rifle, it actually cocks the trigger. We'll get into that later on, but it's kind of interesting. As you saw in my introduction, the barrel is not in great condition. I've been cleaning it and still getting crud out of it. So I can see the rifling now. Probably should have looked at it a little more closely when I bought it, but I thought, but then again, every air rifle I've ever come across, whether the bore has been dirty or not, it's always come shiny with a few passes of a swab. In this case, no. I wouldn't call it rust. It's not rusty. Just dark gray grime coming out of it, sort of caked into the rifling. I don't know, with people shooting pellets out of it made of chalk or something stupid. I don't know. Hopefully there's not too much abuse on the bore, but there's every reason to expect that it won't be as accurate as I would like it to be. But at least I can learn a lot from it, I think. It is an interesting gun just to look at it. The stock has that fairly weak kind of shape to it. I'm not a big fan of this rounded pistol grip, but that was what they did at the time. The trigger guard looks like it could be a stamping, but it isn't. It's actually rather nicely milled out of a thicker piece of metal. That's a nice touch. You don't always see that. The gun has a one-piece cocking link. It isn't hinged, so you do have this long slot in the stock, which of course is always an invitation to see cracks appear in here, but this one's okay. The stock itself, yeah, it's got scratches and marks on it, some paint here and there. Like we just, what air guns always collect paint? I don't understand. Where does the paint come from? But anyway, the stock probably could use some refinishing. It looks a little bit tired, so but it's a nice little piece of beach, I guess. But the gun's got some nice touches to it, some quality things. You can see a locking screw on the on the main bolt here, a locking screw on the cocking link. The rear sight is just fairly straightforward, adjustable for elevation only. Looks like you could dovetail, tap it back and forth in the dovetail here, but you could also do that to the front sight as well, I think. We'll see how that kind of goes. No place for a scope, sad to say. 1952, that wasn't really on the radar. There isn't a safety on it either. There is a small adjustment here for the trigger. It looks like there's some sort of locking screw for it or something. It appears to be missing, so we'll have to go over all that. I've had it apart already just to take a peek inside it. Besides, I had to take the barrel off anyway to try and give it a thorough cleaning. I wanted to mount it in a vise and just keep pushing swabs through it. Tried a bore snake. I've tried various. I actually went out and bought a 177 caliber bore brush because first time ever needed anything like that. But yeah, hopefully it'll be a fun project to work on. Just kind of bring it back a little bit. So 1952. That's a 70-year-old rifle now. Oh my gosh, that's hard to believe, but it is. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. The mechanism appeared to be pretty darn dry, and looks like it hasn't been properly lubricated in a long time, if ever. So, but didn't really see anything broken or missing except for that one little retaining screw on the trigger there. So we'll have some fun with this and follow along. Okay, so we have our Model 27 all apart, and we understand things a little bit better now. Interesting setup for the trigger. This is, we can see a ball bearing in there. 2 of them, or something. I have to get a closer look at that. Yeah, the fairly strong trigger spring here. There is an adjustment there, and there should be a locking screw in that. That must go all the way up here and do something. And this is an interesting design in that when you pull the trigger, this pivots away from it and lets this piece go forward, which lets the piston get unlocked from it. Not entirely clear on how it all works just yet. No, that goes in there like that, and that... I don't know. It's interesting. It isn't the famous 3 ball bearing sear, which works. If I just grab this here. The 3 ball bearing sear works very much like the collar lock on an air hose that you see with your compressor. The trigger allowed the thing to pop forward and allowed the ball bearings to pop out and allowed the piston to go forward. Clever design. The ball bearings don't actually, they're not in the trigger, they're just the release mechanism. Very clever, but that isn't what we've got here. We've got a more conventional something holding the mechanism back. Oh, this comes out the back. Okay. Yeah, so here's our sear surfaces. But this all works together with the outer part that I put aside here. I can't see it. Oh yeah, right here. So yeah, this thing rocks inside there. It is meant to, and there's a spring there. So yeah, we'll clean all that up and make sure it's all working properly before I put it back together again. It's a little grubby. The piston, and with the classic Diana locking surface on the back with the stud. This is a little bit bent looking, and this isn't quite round. So, and this is a separate piece that's been hammered on the back, and it's a sheet metal assembly, folded and cut. Piece crimped on the front, piece crimped on the back. I'm not sure how that compares to a pre-war Diana, but this is clearly how Milbur were doing it in the 1950s. Removed the seal. We've got another one of those vulcanite fiber washers in there, and that backs up what I believe is leather. This is it must be leather. It's all kind of crumbling here. There's cracks in it. I'll be making a new one for that, I think, and this just goes inside it to keep it shape. And this also appears to be leather, but yeah, that'll be okay. So yeah, it's all pretty grubby, but we'll clean everything thoroughly and make new parts as necessary and see if we can see what's going on here. That is not round, but maybe that's what they had to do to go down the barrel or the piston. And we'll clean out whatever's in there and see what we got. Looks like a nice little project.
I gave all the interior parts a thorough cleaning, scrubbing all the residue of oil, which pretty much just turned to, looks like a varnish, but it is just oil residue that's just hardened on all the surfaces. So give that a thorough cleaning. And after all this, I dunked all the pieces in my ultrasonic bath, and then which got rid of everything else that remained. Get it all ready for relubrication. Now to go about making a new piston seal, first thing to do is to measure up the original pieces and try to figure out what size they're supposed to be. Diameter is easy enough. Pretty much a 1-inch piston tube, 25 millimeter. That's fairly standard. Then you have to decide what thickness of leather you're going to use. I chose this piece, but if I was going to make another one, I would use a slightly thinner piece for sure. This one ended up being a little bit too thick. I ended up having to shave it down just a little bit to get it in the gun. So I already had this piece made, but otherwise you'd take a drill bit and bore into a block of wood to a good depth to make the mold for your piston seal. You soak your piece of leather in water for at least a day, and you pick a suitable candidate. In this case, ended up being a 12 millimeter socket from an inexpensive socket set, because you pound the leather, which is fairly soft now, into the recess, and you let it dry out for at least a day. I was trying to figure out just what depth I needed there. I didn't want it to be too deep, so I stuffed a washer in there just to raise it up a little bit. Chose a nice sharp knife. Clamped it in a bit first, and then chose a nice sharp knife to cut all around the edge of it. At least part way through. I didn't want to dull my knife on the steel of the socket. Used a less fancy utility blade to cut the rest of the way through the leather, or at least most of the way through. And the nice thing about leather is that it might look a little bit rough after you've made this piece, but it will be conformed and molded to the interior of the piston. This piece here looks quite crisply edged, but I'm sure it would have been when it was new. And my new piece will look like that eventually as well. I'll clean up some of those rough edges a bit, but it'll fit nicely. And I chose a punch that would give me the right size hole for the retaining screw. Try to get it as close to the center of the thing as possible, although again it doesn't matter all that much. Then I dunked it in motor oil for another day just to get it fully lubricated. So I have the piston parts all buffed up nicely here. Just a little bit of, taking off some of the hard baked on grime and smooth out some of the little rough pieces here and there, but nothing special. But we now have our new piston seal popped out of its wooden mold. And yeah, it's a bit rounded than you might think, but obviously the place to form that into exactly the shape it needs to be is obviously stuffing it inside the piston, putting under spring pressure is going to form fit it hopefully perfectly to our needs, and it'll fit tightly. So to put it back together again, I need, let's see, the screw. This little intermediate piece, which same age as the original seal, but not crumbling nearly as badly, so we'll reuse that for sure. Put these back in the camera center here. And I'm going to get some thread lock. Here we go. I'm going to use the blue stuff instead of the red. The red, to remove it, would require heat. Yes, I have no plans to remove this thing anytime soon, but we do need it to be in there nice and tight and not to work itself loose. So first things first, this goes through there. This goes inside there. And then on top of this fiber washer, which the gun originally had. See, we're losing focus a bit here, so I can get a little closer.
no, these don't form as neat and tight a fit as the originals did. But as I say, squash it in there under pressure, fire it a few times. The leather is going to conform itself quite nicely to the confines of the piston. And I'll put this on there like that. And we do need to screw that down nice and tight. Perfect fit. Okay, there's a bit of a nick in the sidewall there. I think that, not sure how that came by, but it should still be fine. Unlike a synthetic seal, a leather seal is fairly tolerant of all sorts of little defects and things like that, and it will, as I said, mold itself. Synthetic seals, you get a small rip in them and they can just tear, so you have to be much more careful with them. You don't want to be sloppy with anything. Going to apply a bit of grease to this. This is a molybdenum grease, front and back of the piston here. Probably should have put my plastic gloves on for this, but there we go. Okay. We have a bit of a cup shape in here, maybe more than we need. I could have trimmed this back maybe another 1/16 of an inch, a couple of millimeters, but probably don't need it. It is going to press back a bit under pressure, and that will squash it down to place. And it's a good idea probably at some point to, after having made a new seal like this, sometime in the future, take the gun apart and just make sure it is doing what it's supposed to. Now, this is going to go up in here, and this is going to be a fairly tight fit, being the first time these two pieces have ever been together. This could take a bit of squeezing. And again, you don't want to gouge the edges of your freshly made leather. Yeah, it'll get in there, but it's not going to be easy. Also, not very easy to do this with the camera in the way. No, I'm going to have to fiddle with this a bit. Probably have to do this off camera. Get enough room on the bench to do that. Anyway, we'll squeeze it in there. Well, I'm almost done cleaning and polishing all the parts. I've still got little ways to go here and there on some of them. But while I've still got it all apart, I thought it'd be kind of fun to go over one of the things that makes this rifle a little special, a little unique, and certainly a little more unusual compared to some of the things that I usually work on. This is the piston and trigger mechanism from the rear of the gun. As you can see, this is the main piston spring, which and its spring guide, which goes up inside the main piston here and is compressed. I'll take this out of the way since we know what it does. And the spring, of course, is held back by the spring guide and can't go past here. This is the top of the gun, and this is the pin that goes all the way through and anchors this sleeve inside the main piston tube. So, what is all going on here? This interesting cone-shaped surface on the back of the piston pushes through that and comes into here. This rides inside this sleeve, goes in from the back, and oddly enough, this thing wobbles up and down a good bit. I got that pin in there properly. But yeah, it doesn't fit. It isn't a tight fit. It actually wobbles a bit, and this spring sits in there like that up against the piston tube and keeps it pressed down, keeps downward pressure on it. When this piston comes in, it locks against that piece. This surface right here is biased against the inside of this, which I can show you easy enough. It's better to do that now with that out of the way, now that we know what it does. This rocks down, and this little surface right there is the actual latch that holds the piston from going forward. And it is pressed down again by that little, kept down by that little spring. I do wonder how safe it is. I wonder if you were to whack the gun hard enough, would this part vibrate enough to unlatch and let the gun fire? I might actually try that. Cock it and then whack it with a mallet and see what happens. But how does it actually fire? Because this is the trigger right here, and it's pinned to this part right there, and it has this wonderfully tough little ball bearing on it, and this other piece which is adjustable for height. You can move it up and down. I think it should be somewhere around about here for maximum effect, but it can go up and down quite a bit. A locking screw goes in from the front, which is missing. I'll have to find something for that. But this piece attaches to this, is pinned to this right there, and it rocks back and forth. And when, if you can see the ball bearing, one ball bearing in there makes contact, and then as the trigger comes forward, then it teeter-totters onto that next pin and really pulls it. And this is the sear right there. Well, that has nothing to do with our wonderful little latch up here. It doesn't come anywhere near it. What this does is this piece right here, when you cock the gun and push that all the way through like that, this piece, which is riding in from the back, is pushed all the way back to where this surface right there latches on the trigger sear. Very neat. And what happens then is this rather strong spring is pushing against that inner piece and can't let it go forward until the trigger lets it go. And you just see it just snaps far, just goes that far forward. And what happens there is this wedge-shaped piece smacks forward and forces these two apart. Essentially pushes this up out of the way and lets the piston go forward. This is effectively a hammer, and we are releasing a little small hammer powered by this. So the trigger only has to worry about the spring pressure here and the great massive spring pressure of the piston spring does not bind on the trigger mechanism at all. So very clever system, and I believe this is probably what Diana enthusiasts call the falling block trigger, the pre-war design, because this gun, made by Milbro in Scotland under the Diana name, I don't believe they would have designed an all-new trigger in the 1950s for 1952 when this gun was made. So I'm guessing this is the pre-war design brought back to life under Scottish manufacture. So yeah, why was this replaced by the famous ball bearing trigger where you've got 3 ball bearings that let the piston go? Probably that was actually easier to manufacture. You've got a fair number of little shapes here with some fairly complicated milling procedures to make them exactly right. So it might be that this was just too complicated a thing to make, and after having taken the gun apart initially and inspected it and then put it back together again, I can tell you this was a bear to put back in. I imagine there must be some sort of jig that the factory would have used to compress everything together and yet allow you, because you have to push this spring past this pin when you're putting it through. That's not easy. There must have been some special rig that would have done it, allowed it to compress and yet enough room to get the pin past it. I'm going to have to see what I can do to make it a little bit easier than what I did last time. But a very clever and ingenious trigger mechanism, and when it's all clean and lubricated, we'll have to evaluate how it does, because it was a bit rough when I first tried it. All the parts are pretty gunked up, and I think this was not at its best adjustment. So yeah, very cool, and we'll get it all back together again.
I decided to remove the finish off the stock mainly by scraping it. Avoided using paint stripper for as much as I could. But one thing that surprised me was how, you don't really notice it at first, but the tone of the original varnish had a certain greenish hue to it, that when you scraped it clear, it was like, oh wow, the wood was a lot nicer and warmer yellow than it first appeared. That varnish did remind me just a little bit too much of old school desks from elementary school, so I was quite happy to get rid of it.
So So after much poking, prodding, and massaging, I've got my piston seal on the front of the piston neatly tucked up inside there, and I'm all ready to begin assembly of this fairly simple mechanism here. The spring, which I fixed the end on it, this one here, because it was driving me crazy, sticking up in the air a bit. I'm going to lubricate it with lithium grease in this instance, instead of the red and tacky stuff, because I don't think it needs the extra dampening of that of the sticky stuff in this instance. So I'll slide that in halfway and do the rest of it. The tricky part is going to be trying to get the trigger mechanism in, because I haven't quite figured out the easiest way to do that, or how they did it at the factory, except obviously they must have had some sort of a jig to compress all the springs at once and get the bits in there. Yeah, that goes in there like so, and this goes in behind it, and this has a little hole in the top for this little spring here, which means this has to go inside that way, and yeah, grease that as well. In this instance I'm going to use moly grease. I prefer grease on slow moving surfaces. Faster moving things usually require oil. And the nice thing about grease is it doesn't migrate out of the way. So this has to go in there like so, and this pin goes through there like that, and through the piston tube. And I got a little tiny sliver of leather there. So that goes in like that. But this has to go in first. Again, some more white lithium on here, inside of the spring. And this part I notice is a little bit, this end of the tube is not quite perfect, but well, I've got all the trigger bits back in, and the piston is in place. A little bit easier than I did it last time, just trying to figure out how the factory would have held that spring past the pin while they got it through. So it's in there. Now I should be able to pull this one out, because of course I need that to attach the trigger guard. It should come out again. It's pretty stiff, but it was a pretty stiff screw to start with. Yeah, that just goes straight through that threaded hole there, and there's a recess that holds, just a pocket that holds that in place there. So you can see the two-stage trigger mechanism here. They get first stage and second stage. At least I think that's what's supposed to be going on. We'll see how that works out. The adjustment for it right there, as I said. Yeah, okay, not much more to do now, and just put the rest of the pieces back on and turn it into a finished rifle. Okay, so we're going to try the newly refurbished Diana across the chronograph. Let's see how we can do with that. Going to shoot, at least I'm going to get 10 shots of RWS Superdome, which are an 8.3 grain pellet, so slightly on the heavier side. There we go, that should do it. Okay. .275. That's pretty much half what I just saw in the previous shot. .480. .483. 482. $479. Wow, that's really consistent. $477. Three. Three. 40. 40. Now for a little more. That's not every. 475. That's pretty good. Let's try slightly higher color. Actually get there. 520. 520. 521. 510. 515. 512. 510. 507. 503. 506. So now that I know the gun has good power, I shot it at target at some 27 yards, and I discovered the pellets that it liked the best were these JSB Exact Express, the 7.87 grain ones, because I ended up with a 22mm group, which I'm pretty content with, given that it's iron sights at a fairly long distance. On the negative side, the group is a bit high, about some 4 inches above my point of aim, so perhaps I can add a bead to the front sight or something, because the rear sight was all the way down, so something to consider for future. If at some point during this video you were wondering where have I seen this gun before or something like it, well, if you think back to episode 5, which is probably my most watched video of all, the Shanghai 61, an inexpensive rifle from China, made probably in the 1980s, and it seems to bear more than a striking resemblance to this Diana 27. I've had people speculate that the Shanghai 61 was based on a BSA, based on a Slavia, based on other things, but when you look at them side by side, it's hard not to see something of a family resemblance here. The Shanghai overall is a bit shorter. The barrel is only 39 centimeters versus 43 on the Diana. The Diana also has a rather longer piston tube than the Shanghai, but they're finished off in a lot the same way. You have this very square front end on it, main pivot screw with a locking screw. The sights are ridiculously similar. That little ladder that you pull back and forth on there. Clearly, I think the Chinese factory had one of these on hand when they were putting this together. The single groove in the forearm, the single piece cocking linkage. This is a solid casting that has no jiggling or vibration whatsoever. This one is a hollow stamping, and it wriggles around quite a bit in there. A much less expensive gun. And of course they did not copy the rather overly intricate and clever trigger mechanism in here. This just has a very direct sear. But that said, it's not terrible. This actually shoots pretty well for its shot cycle. I have struggles with accuracy with it, but this one definitely a much more refined gun, a lot smoother in cocking and closing it. Yeah, it's definitely draws its inspiration from this one, I think. So there's your answer, all of those who wondered where the Chinese got their inspiration from.
So, some final thoughts on the Diana Model 27, at least as far as this British-made version goes. I do start to really understand why people consider the 27 a classic air rifle. As I said earlier on, it seems to be the right weight, the right size, to be a gun that could be shot happily by a youth who's learning some marksmanship. But also, it can be a very good air gun for a grown-up as well. The quality is there, the accuracy is there. Even with this example with a very rough barrel, it still seems to shoot better than a lot of other things I have. And it just, the overall quality, the way that it locks up, the way everything is, tight, doesn't rattle, is excellent. Yeah, there's a few things I could improve on it, such as the sight picture, for instance. But overall, thanks for watching. Chronograph will be returning. Consider subscribing.